When you were talking to companies like ours and others that were thinking about listing on the US, how were you selling it? What was your sort of sales process
Yes,
for that?
sure. Yeah, I found that for growth companies from different parts of the world, whether it be Canada or Europe or Asia or Latin America, that's primarily that's what we tailored a lot of the investor tools, the investor targeting tools. When I would in my most recent role, I think we added a lot of value to companies such as you are describing. So
Mhm.
the path that these companies took in that landscape of growth, trying to get noticed among the monster sized companies out there, is to build upon the niche that they have. And that is, if they're a European or a Canadian company, they've likely been able to attract investors along the way, right? Or even a US based company, the venture capital community in the US, not so much private equity because that's after the larger companies, but the venture capital community is still open to investing, at least in the US, to a good story. And I think it's the same other parts of the world. So really, that's how companies build their story. Is usually I saw that there were some kind of investors involved before they get to the stage where they want to do that IPO, right? So it's really about tapping into that community, that knowledge. And I would say that across the board, it usually happened that the company would go public in their local market, right? Because
Mhm.
you're competing in the U.S. with, there have been some high profile IPOs. For example, Viking cruise ships just went public a week ago. Reddit, the big companies out there, a few AI companies as well. That's where the 800-pound gorillas are going. I think politically here in the U.S., the landscape is better than it was a year ago, but it's not
Mhm.
fantastic, right? So there are probably more IPOs in the pipeline, but still there's a lot of uncertainty. In the beginning of the year, there was some expectations that rates will be cut 4 or 5 times perhaps this year. Rates, we don't know what's going to happen. And it was, we're
Yeah.
still wrestling with inflation. So I'm just pointing out that it's not easy to come out of the box here. So it might be easier to go onto a local market, but that's where I think the OTC market has really come in and helped, because they can give you exposure to the US, take advantage of some of the visibility programs they have without the compliance obligations that
Yeah.
are
So,
required for.
so
Yeah.
let me just explain how that worked for us, and you can correct me if I was wrong. But when we were looking at an OTC listing, like I mentioned, other markets have all markets have their own little rules and pros and cons. Some are more flexible than others. When we were looking at US markets, many of the markets, like the Nasdaq, had quarterly reporting, and for a small company, that's a big overhead.
Yes.
You basically finish one quarterly report and start the next one. It's a pretty
Yes.
brutal schedule. Whereas in Frankfurt, we had a annual audited reports, and then half a year later, you did just management reports, and that in itself was still a big piece of work. And one of the things that you sold us on with the OTC QX was the fact that we could use the same reporting structure that we were already using in Frankfurt, and then get access to the American market. So is that sort of, have I articulated that right?
Callum, that is exactly the point.